All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. I am the host and moderator of the Crowdsourced Politics podcast, Cypher, and we are a podcast born out of a funky little corner of the internet debate community that was originally started on Facebook and is now propagated pretty much all across the web. Been podcasting for about 2 years, streaming for about a year. And we like to do the Thursday news roundup every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All our news roundup shows are call-in shows and are open to other streamers, podcast producers, pundits, etc. in order to come on and discuss the weeks of news that was with the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. Tonight, I am flying solo, so we'll be getting into it very shortly. So before we get into it, I want to plug our other show, Cypher State. Cypher State is a foreign affairs and foreign policy focused podcast that looks at an issue that is going on in the broader world that might have profound political or geopolitical impacts in the future and right now. Our last episode this is done every month on the third Thursday of each month at about 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's where it's streamed to Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch, where it'll be produced in podcast form in about a week or so after that. Time dependent on my schedule being able to edit it properly. The last episode was on the German elections, and you can find that episode on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. So let's go ahead. This next episode, we are still figuring out what the topic is. So be sure to tune into this program every Thursday to figure out what's going on there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the show. Welcome back, everybody. This is Cypher, host and moderator of the Crowdsourced Politics podcast, here with a week's worth of news coming at you in about 2 hours worth of content here. We're going to go ahead and get started. The news was hopping this week with elections across the country, the G20 Summit, the Climate Summit, cases in the Supreme Court, and more. So let's dive right in. Starting with the elections that happened this past Tuesday. There were multiple elections this past Tuesday with the Virginia governor's race and one in New Jersey, getting the most attention in the media and on social media. So we're going to start right there. The Republican in Virginia, Glenn Youngkin, prevailed over Democrat Terry McAuliffe, 50.9% to 48.4%. The race was so tight in New Jersey that the final results weren't called until yesterday afternoon, when it was reported that incumbent Democrat Phil Murphy was reelected 50.4% to Republican Jack Ciattarelli's 48.8%, a margin of only 50,000 votes. Virginia in particular is kind of a weird case because the Virginia governor can't serve more than 2 consecutive terms. Here's a quick rundown of why. According to NPR, Virginia's first governor was selected by the General Assembly and limited to 3 one-year terms. Several early governors, including Patrick Henry James Moore and George William Smith, served 2 non-consecutive terms. Virginia's current 4-year term was considered progressive at the time of the passage of the 1851 Constitution that put it into code, according to Larry Sabato, director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. It was also quite common in the South and in a few other states to have that 1-term limit, Sabato said. It would just happened all of the other states had abolished it in the years and decades since. Virginia is the only one that has not. Mills Goodwin, a segregationist and holdout from the Byrd machine, was the only governor to be popularly elected twice, first as a Democrat in 1966 and then again as a Republican in 1974, with Republican Linwood Holton sandwiched in between. Youngkin is the first Republican to win Virginia since 2009. In New Jersey, every governor elected since 1889 has been a member of the opposite party of the sitting president. Mr. Murphy became the first Democrat to be reelected to the governor's office in 44 years. There's already speculation as to whether a recount will be conducted. In New Jersey, candidates or citizens can request a recount. There's no mechanism for automatic recount. According to NewJersey.com, candidates may request a count within 17 days of election day by filing a lawsuit in the Superior Court in the county where, quote, such district or districts are located for a recount of the votes cast at the election in any district or districts. Voters or outside groups can request a recount as well. The law says that when 10 votes within the same time period have a, quote, reason to believe that an error has been so made in counting the votes upon any public question at any election, they too can file suit in Superior Court. The person or groups requesting the recount must believe that an error has been made, the law states. Now, what drove voters to the polls in both of these elections? That is going to be what analysts, political pundits like us, and I'm also an analyst, will be diving into in the weeks to come, doing things like looking at what the exit poll says, doing surveys and the like in order to actually find what was on voters' mind at the time that they casted their ballot. Now, one of the things that we can see here within both of these votes is that there was a large push by Republicans to link both of these elections to not only the economy with fears of inflation, but also cultural issues, in particularly school boards and education. Not just within the state itself, but also trying to prevent what other states may have been doing from coming to the states that were up for election. So voter turnout in this cycle favored Republicans in Tuesday's elections, energized by the aspects of the culture war Republican candidates largely ran on, i.e. school board stuff. Republican messaging centered around education, specifically the teaching of critical race theory, which we should say is not actually being taught in school. That said, colloquially, critical race theory has been used as a catch-all phrase to include everything from as benign as teaching about things like the Tulsa Race Massacre and those sort of things to anything as advanced as actually separating students between like classically oppressor and oppressed groups in class to try to make some sort of analogy about why things are the way they are. The earliest example of this is the brown-eyed test, and I feel like that's probably a better way to go about it. Is creating something that's not real to use as an analogy of something that is very real. So some of the concerns that parents have over these things is not necessarily without merit, but it should be talked in about a very nuanced way due to linking everything that Republicans typically are against under one umbrella. Moving on. The messaging appears to have resonated with suburban voters, a demographic that was key to Democrats in 2020, especially for the presidential race. Reporting by the New York Times states that after an unexpected strong showing on Tuesday night, Republicans are heading into 2022 midterm elections with what they believe will be a highly effective political strategy, capitalizing on the frustrations of suburban parents still reeling from the devastating fallout of the pandemic era schooling. Seizing on education as a newly potent wedge issue, Republicans have moved to galvanize crucial groups of voters around what the party calls parental rights. Issues in public schools, a hodgepodge of conservative causes ranging from eradicating mask mandates to demanding changes to the way children are taught about racism in general. Yet in this free-floating sense of rage from parents, many of whom felt abandoned by government during the worst months of the pandemic, that arose from the off-year election as one of the most powerful drivers for Republican candidates. Pushing a mantra of greater parental control, Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate from Virginia, stoked the resentment and fear of some white voters who were alarmed by efforts to teach more critical history of racism in America. He attacked critical race theory. He released an ad that was a throwback to the days of banning books highlighting objections by a white mother and her high school age son to Beloved, the canonical novel about slavery by the Black Nobel laureate Toni Morrison. For weeks before the Virginia election, Republicans pointed to the school strategy as the possible template for the entire party. Mr. Youngkin, narrow but decisive victory on Tuesday, confirmed for Republicans that they had an issue capable of uniting diverse groups of voters. And when we say diverse group of voters, we actually mean diverse group of voters. Because of how everything has been kind of shoved into the CRT umbrella by Republicans, things like the bigotry of low expectation, the victimhood mentality is also being included in that umbrella of CRT colloquially. So when liberals, leftists, etc., try to argue against these things about saying, hey, CRT is not being actually taught in school or what have you, it is very important to note that they are not talking about actual CRT. So if you want to actually be effective in your messaging against these programs, then you're going to have to do two things. One, we already lost the messaging war about CRT, about it being a thing that isn't being taught, because that's not what anybody cares about. People care about all this other stuff that you're saying is CRT is a catch-all. Due to Democrats and liberals and leftists being very reluctant to, or maybe not even reluctant, probably the better way to say that would be the inherent pushback that got and the inability to not let it go because of that, because it's not being taught, right? They've already said that, well, look, these things over here are said to be part of CRT, but they're not. But the people that claim to be CRT scholars say that they are part of CRT. So it gets them all muddled and it makes everybody just look like a liar, except for the Republicans that are saying that CRT is taught in school. That ship sailed when liberals, leftists, etc., didn't push back on it effectively. So stop saying that CRT isn't being taught in school. Instead, focus on the things that aren't being taught in school. The type of things that Republicans are mostly afraid of, which is anything that will cause resentment or recalcitrance against or the idea that white people are evil inherently. And if that is actually taught in school, or not actually taught in school, but haphazardly mentioned and makes people feel like it is, not just people like the activists or people, I'm talking about like regular everyday parents, the kids that attend these schools, the kids that do go through these programs. If that is actually being done in a haphazard way, then you need to call it out as being haphazard and counterproductive. You need to focus on what works and distance yourself from the stuff that doesn't work, even though people are claiming that that is the same thing. If it doesn't work, if it's counterproductive, then you shouldn't be defending it. You should be going against it. Let's see here. Just now I lost my place in my notes. Give me a second. While the conservatives news media and Republican candidates stirred the stew of anxieties and racial resentment that animated that party space, thundering about equity initiatives, books with sexual content, and transgender students on sports teams, they largely avoided offering specific plans to tackle thornier issues like budget cuts and deepening educational inequalities. They also, one of the things that we should mention is they also went after things like the liberal to left notion of testing and quote unquote meritocratic systems of teaching children. Wow, it's really quiet in here. So things like testing used to create gifted programs, things that are used by various schools and have been for decades in order to place people into more advanced programs for them to be able to show that they learn quicker or are more intelligent or what have you. And where those programs aren't necessarily representative of the demographics that are present within a specific locality. One of the things that a lot of parents are against is getting rid of those programs because they feel that those programs help their particular child and also help other children that may be missed by other systems. For example, if you don't have a test that can catch whether a person is actually more advanced than what we're letting on, then those people tend to fall through the cracks, especially if they suffer from quote unquote behavioral problems, such as acting out or being bored in school because they're not going fast enough, and ends up acting out accordingly because they have nothing that they can do, and they feel like it's going on a meandering pace. Particularly with African American Black parents, this is one of those ways that can actually probably tackle the issue of teacher bias against their child, whether it's from racial cultural differences and not being able to read those kids, or from other things. So that is another important thing to understand, is that why these parents see that way. There's also with Asian American parents and students where they believe that these tests are actually meritocratic and they actually test things that are pertinent, and they feel like by doing initiatives to increase diversity, inclusion, equity, that they are being left out and they're experiencing systemic racism on them because it negatively impacts them more. One important thing, one of these things that is a clear indication that might be the case are the cases that are one against Harvard and earlier than the cases against Harvard and Stanford and the elite Ivy League schools where Asian Americans have been disproportionately affected by reducing standardized testing and stuff like that, is also within California when they moved to a more test-based, grade-based system and got rid of the more racially inclusive things, is that they saw an increase of Asian Americans participating in schools in high like basically Ivy League schools, so Caltech and that sort of stuff in the state system, where they were admitted at a disproportionate rate because they're just worked harder, smarter, whatever have you. And so they make up, I think it's like 33% of students that attend Caltech are Asian Americans. And that's punching like way above their weight. They I think Asian Americans in California make up like 5% of the population, if that, honestly. And so they are overrepresented because they actually do better on these tests and they have more either academic skills or what have you, or their parents push them. Whatever the case is that they're over quote unquote represented. So that is another thing that needs to be understood in this. So as I said a little bit earlier, one of the things that we can do, people that actually care about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or as Republicans like to call it, diversity, inclusion, and equity, so it spells out DIE. If you haven't heard that, if you haven't heard this referred to as DIE, then you will live in a bubble. Your social media bubble or your in real life bubble is pretty thick, and you need to get out of that bubble so you can understand these things. Just trust me on this one. You really, really need to. One of the things that can be done with these things is, like I said, is to actually target the programs that are ineffective, because a lot of people view a lot of the bad diversity training as just checking a box and something that everybody does so that people can look like they're doing something. And that's largely what it is, especially in corporate world. But within education, it's a bit different. It's more nuanced. It's not just checking a box. It's trying to help people understand why racial tensions are the way that they are. And that is important. It is important for kids to understand this. And it should be the communities, maybe a school, maybe some other program, but like school is the default in the United States, to teach these things and help them understand so they can navigate in the world more. They can navigate the world more successfully. And when it is done badly, it turns everyone off from the training. I'm sure that Joe Lewis, one of the fellow Twitch streamers on here, has talked about this a lot. So you should go check out what he has to say on this. He's really good on this subject. He talks about how there's good equity, inclusive equity training, diversity training, whatever, and there's bad diversity equity training. And you need to be able to understand the difference, especially when it comes to children, because let's face it, nobody wants their kid to feel bad about themselves for something that they can't control. And if that is what is happening, regardless of the intention, that's a negative, and it's going to galvanize parents against that sort of training. And that is what we saw, at least in West Virginia. I keep saying West Virginia. It's Virginia. It's a force of habit from saying West Virginia because I never talk about Virginia, but Virginia, in Virginia, that's one of the key points. Youngkin was down in the polls, like being slaughtered. It was like 58 to like 41 or something ridiculous, right? Like where McAuliffe was doing much better. And then when he was able to make education a central issue, it came to the forefront and parents actually came out in droves to support him. Now, one of the other interesting things here that we have to remember is that off-year elections have a low voter turnout. So I'm going to look it up really quick because I don't want to talk out my butt. Election turnout 2021. Let's see. Highest turnouts in recent history. See, that's another thing. This was a high turnout for an off-year election because of these issues. Parents came out and voted. It was 55% of the Commonwealth came out and supported in this off-year election. That should tell you how much this issue is important to people. And if you don't think it's important, you need to go outside and touch some fucking grass. Talk to some people out there, get off of leftist Twitter, go talk to regular people, watch some regular news to understand that. Your local regular news, not the national regular news, not fucking CNN, not MSNBC, watch Fox News because you need to understand what they're saying so you can combat it, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. Like, to understand where people are actually coming from, because this issue is important. Education is one of my fundamental things that I focus on when I am trying to like talk about like different issues. Education is on the top. We don't expect enough from our kids. We don't teach them enough. We don't educate them well. Like, and this isn't a teacher issue. This is a systemic issue. It's not that the teachers suck. It's what the teachers are told to teach isn't enough for a lot of kids. And we United States here, if you're watching from overseas, we need to do better by our kids. And ultimately, that is what every single parent wants to have happen. And they're right. So if we're not doing right by them, if we're not ensuring that parents understand that if we're not ensuring that parents understand why things are being done the way that they are, they'll turn against you. For every poll that you'll read in the US about anything, where it comes to crime, education, whatever, a lot of it tends to skew liberal. Like, 60%, maybe 70% of people support a particular liberal program. But as soon as they feel personally impacted and it's a liberal program that's doing it, doesn't matter if it actually is or not. If they feel that it is, they're turning against you. Full stop. Turning right around and voting for the Republican. That's why this issue is important. And regardless of what people tell you, regardless of what they say, maybe this isn't the biggest issue, or this isn't just like some cut and dry thing. No, it's a large one. You don't go from 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th issue to number 2 unless it's actually an issue. Unless people feel like it's at least unless people feel that it's an actual issue. And that's what people need to realize. That's what happened in West Virginia. All right. I think I went on my little rant about that enough. I hate to do this, but I don't have my water with me, so I need to go get my water. So I will be right back. I swear sorry. All right, I'm back. I'm sorry about that small impromptu bake. Push the excuse. I wasn't doing any excuses. I was talking straight about this. Are you behind again? Maybe it isn't me. I bet you're behind again. Racial tensions seem to go away once one logs off and heads out to see the nation. Social media and MSN push racial tensions. I don't know if that's true. I will say that social media does make it worse, for sure. But you don't look at like diversity training as anti-white as a default unless racial tensions are there. And I think that's a lot of what's happened. I think that's a default notion here. Oh. There we go. Now I'm a little more centered too. So I think that's what happened. What happened here. Now there's additional, but not everything is not lost, even though Democrats did worse than what would be expected, given the turnout in 2020, given the higher turnout that skewed Republicans in Virginia. There has been other interesting elections that happened across the country that are not in the news as much as maybe they should be. So in Des Moines, Iowa, Deirdre Shoemaker shook things up in Des Moines, Iowa Tuesday night after unseating the incumbent Bill Gray. The second black woman to join the Des Moines City Council, Shoemaker ran on a solidly progressive platform, including defunding the police. An active organizer with the local Black Liberation Movement group, the Des Moines Register quoted Shoemaker saying that she wouldn't have ever run for office if she hadn't been tear-gassed during racial justice protest. So despite the fact that we see some progressives losing in some areas and education being a very huge issue and defund the police being a bad issue in some areas, it seems that it's not cut and dry across the country. Another progressive, Michelle Wu, won the runoff election for mayor, making the first time in nearly 200 years that Boston will have elected a non-white man. Endorsed by acting Mayor Kim Janey and Representative Ayanna Pressley, Wu focused on addressing the needs of hurting Bostonians. Looking to create a landscape where all people in the city can not only survive, but thrive, Wu put forth a plan focused on rent stabilization and free public transit, two huge issues to people that live on the cusp of poverty and are barely middle class. If you are not from the Northeast, you don't understand how important public transit is to everyday life. People typically don't drive their cars everywhere in the Northeast in these huge, urbanly dense populated areas because it is just a nightmare to get around. And so public transit offers people a way to get around not only effectively, but fairly cheaply. But it also is just like owning a car, buying gas, it's also an expense that hurts poor people most. And so by promising free public transit, that can be as much as $200 extra in a person's pocket a month on saving on public transit fees. So that's pretty big deal. In Minneapolis, a ballot question prompted by the murder of George Floyd by police officers in 2020 was defeated by voters on Tuesday. The ballot question called for a new Department of Public Safety to take a comprehensive public health approach to the delivery of functions that would be determined by the mayor and city council. While Minneapolis voters did not pass the public safety amendment, there is something to be said for the over 60,000 residents willing to take a chance on a new vision for public safety. It is important to understand here that what they were saying was that it was quintessential abolish the police, but it was like repeal and replace the police. And with the public safety measure here is that they were talking about taking the police officers and fundamentally changing their role to be like kind of different departments to handle different things. So rather than the police being tasked with everything under the sun, they would only be tasked with, basic street patrols and actually dealing with violent crime, whereas nonviolent crime would either go to things like public safety officers, people that don't necessarily carry a gun to enforce traffic regulations, things like pairing a police officer with a mental health worker or social worker to deal with domestic violence situations and the like. It was a full fully reformatted police system that could, in theory, do better than what we have seen police do. Now, the reason that it failed is because during the pandemic, there has been an increase in murders in cities like Minneapolis and other major metropolitan areas. Now, people think that this is because of defund the police, but I don't think it was because of defund the police. I think it's because COVID put a lot of people out of work. A lot of people weren't in work. So a lot of people were having to either supplement their income through crime. And whenever you have to supplement your income through crime, you're going to end up having more violence that goes along with that because people fight over territory and what have you. And as tensions rise in general, violence rise in general. And because America has so many guns, that's going to end up leading to more murder. I think personally that's what happened, because not any police department actually got around to defunding the police. But that's not the narrative, because we lose the messaging war so much. Critical Canadian. It's like our peace officers here. They have the lesser things to deal with when our police do more heavy stuff. Yes, exactly, Critical Canadian. And thank you for joining me on the program tonight. Appreciate you tuning in. You're good people. Everybody, actually, go follow Critical Canadian. He creates really good stuff. Hopefully that worked. Did that go through? I think it's going through. There we go. So go support Critical Canadian, please. Moving on to other election results. So in Georgia, the biggest race on the ballot was in the city of Atlanta. Voters are electing a new mayor, as the current mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms, is not seeking another term. There were over 14 candidates on the ballot, with 5 candidates who have separated themselves in polling over the last few months. With 41% of vote, City Council President Felicia Moore will head to a runoff on November 30th, along with Andre Dickinson, with 23% of the vote. Ours being Crowdsourced Politics' own Sean Dixon, has said that he has seen on apps like Nextdoor, Facebook, and local groups that a lot of the whole pro-police crowd and pro-police, pro-whatever have you, is pushing for, and I want to quote him better, so I'm going to go look it up really quick. Seems that they want to have Felicia Moore in there. So this is probably one of those situations where when you only have 2 people on the ballot and there's the only people that you can vote for, and reasonably one of them is going to win, because if you try to write in somebody, it's basically a waste of vote. They're going to back the candidate that is the least anti or the most pro-police candidate. And so they're probably promoting her because they feel as though she would have their interest closer to heart than Dickinson. And I don't know if that's true. I will have to look this up. And that's what he says. Yes, that's what he keeps saying. So you should see his little comment on here. He's watching on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in, Sean. Appreciate it. So that's what we're seeing here. That's what I would surmise that it is. But I'll have to look at that election, and it will be something that we will report on once it happens. So be sure to stay tuned in here on the Thursday of the week that it happens. Now, moving on to another thing. New York City had a mayor race, and we at Crowdsourced Politics talked a lot about Andrew Yang's run for mayor in the city of New York, and kind of things that he experienced with, media bias or whatever else, kind of his faux pas as well. He stepped in it a few times with saying, maybe we should do this. And everybody's like, you mean the thing that we already do, just don't do it that well? And he's like, okay. So there's things like this. But it came down to Eric Adams, and he defeated Republican nominee Curtis Sliwa. That's not how you pronounce it. It's Sliwa. Curtis, if you don't know, was part of the Angels people group. It was a kind of a paramilitary vigilante street justice group that went around and filled in gaps in police officer patrols and tried to stop crime by sometimes beating the fuck out of people that were committing crime. or, helping police arrest them by making citizens arrest. It depended on the person, but he was the person that started that group. And he's an interesting character. He would be what we would consider a working class Democrat or a Reagan Democrat back in the day. He's probably MAGA now. But he had, oh no, I accidentally clicked my macro button. I think I gotta remove that. So he would be what we're doing that. So yeah, that's something that would happen that he would do. And he was the Republican nominee for mayor of New York. That tells you where New York Republicans are right now. They're very anti-crime to the sense of wanting to go back to the Giuliani era of zero tolerance, not kill them all, but arrest them all and let God figure it out type of thing. Eric Adams, on the other hand, is an ex-police officer. He's a retired New York City Police Department captain who embraced the public safety message. Will be the second black mayor in the city's history after the late David Dinkins. And he ran on a message of unity and pro-police for anti-crime, but also reforming police maybe at the margins, maybe more at the margins than what a lot of progressives would want. But when he ran, he basically dominated the race. Like New York City did instant runoffs. It was the first time they did instant runoffs. That's why there's so many candidates for the primary. And he alone got I want to say it was close to 40% of the vote. And then it was like 40, 30, 20, 10. It was like that cut and dry. And when the second round of voting was tallied, I think he had 55%. So it was like no contest basically. And so he ran on that message, and even among Democrats in New York City, which you would think might be a fairly progressive place, he came out on top. So that shows you kind of where the country is right now in regards to, how to deal with crime, defund the police, etc. It's like Democrats don't know how to message or something. I don't know. I'm just a guy on the internet pontificating. You tell me what your thoughts are. Go ahead and hit me up on Twitter or Discord and let me know what you think. So let's talk about him a little more. A Brooklyn native who currently serves as its borough president, Adams won a chaotic Democratic primary this summer on a promise of both beef up and reform of the New York Police Department amid worries over a rise in violent crime. His message that public safety is the prerequisite to prosperity, something that Andrew Yang also said, resonated with working class Democrat voters outside the traditional liberal enclaves of Manhattan and parts of Brooklyn, which fueled his nomination. Quote, "I am going to be a broccoli mayor," added Adams, who went vegan after being diagnosed with diabetes. "You're not going to like it when you eat it, but as long term, you're going to see the benefits of it." So let's see. What are your guys' thoughts? Let's see. Have a good rest. Oh, thanks, Critical. Will do. Let them rot in Rikers for a few years. Yeah. So one thing about New York elections, the big bird is gone. Big bird. I don't know what you mean by that. Maybe it is me. But yeah. So I mean, that's where the country is, man. That's just. I know reform the police doesn't have the je ne sais quoi of, defund the police, but maybe that is the better message. I don't know. Like I said, I'm just a guy. So moving on to other topics. So we've talked extensively on this program about the Build Back Better bill, known as the social spending bill, and the infrastructure bill. This past Tuesday's election results are going to be used by both progressives and moderates to push their cause in regards to those bills. Jayapal, man, I wish I had her name in front of me. The leader of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, Pamela Jayapal, has said that in her view, a lot of these progressive mayors that won in their cities show that America wants us to fund these social programs. Whereas people like Manchin said, hey, we got to slow down. Apparently, America isn't ready for all this spending. So let's talk about it. We're still waiting for closure on the 1.75. It should be like $2.5 trillion. Not 1.75. It's not enough. Makes me wrong, too. I'm more pissed off that it's not enough, but I really hate being wrong as well. And the infrastructure bill is waiting for reconciliation bill framework to pass. Here's a quick update of where it stands. Despite encouraging words from Senator Manchin last week, it appears that he is now once again pushing back against the bill. According to Axios, Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia, said Monday he won't be pressured into supporting a $1.75 trillion expansion of the nation's social safety net and urged House progressives to pass a $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill in the interim, which is what he wanted all along. He basically wants what he wants and nothing else. And he's not been debating in good faith, like, at all. Like, this is bullshit. Manchin's declarations and the unusually strong language he used in which making them shows Democrats are no closer to passing the two bills that the House leaders hoped to move this week. And President Biden said he will define his presidency. Holding this infrastructure bill hostage is not going to work in any getting my support for the reconciliation bill, Manchin said. As more of the real details of the basic framework for the reconciliation bill are released, what I see are shell games, budget gimmicks that make the real cost of the so-called $1.75 trillion estimate to be almost twice that amount if you extend it permanently. And this is also Joe Manchin, what he's saying. He's saying all these things that basically is like, oh, I don't like the bill, I don't like the spending, oh my God. Why are you going to spend so much money? It's stupid. Oh, Bill de Blasio. Okay, gotcha. And what it boils down to, what it really boils down to is I think that he doesn't like the climate change stuff in it. So he doesn't want to see that in there. If he can get it cut, then he's going to be peachy. So, quoting another person here. So, in a statement, White House press secretary Jen Psaki said that the House plan is fully paid for, will reduce the deficit, and brings down costs for healthcare, childcare, elder care, and housing. Experts agree. 17 Nobel Prize winning economists have said it will reduce inflation. As a result, we remain confident that the plan will gain Senator Manchin's support, she added. Manchin said he won't be pressured for the bill. The contents of the bill framework are also once again in flux, as Democrats wrestle with the spending that many of their members see as key to the bill. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, in a major shift, announced on Wednesday that 4 weeks of paid family and medical leave will be added back into the bill. Good on her. And after Democrats had previously scrapped the provision from the package. The reason that I say this is good on her is because we are one of the only industrialized nations on the planet that doesn't have some form of paid family leave. We have unpaid family leave where you can't get fired for taking it. But if you can't eat, or if you're going to go poor or poorer without working, then you're going to, suffer and you're not going to take it. And that's not something that should happen. If we're going to have a society that's built around both parents working, which we do, right? Then you have to offer the ability of parents or anybody to take care of family members, especially since we don't pay people to do it for us. We don't give people the money to afford elder care, child care, etc. So it has to come out of their pockets. And if you make it to where it's impossible for middle-class people, let alone the poor, to be able to afford it, they're not going to do it. And we all suffer as a result. Every single one of us. Even people without kids. Why do I say even people without kids? Because in the long run, the inability for people to take care of their own makes it more likely that their own will be either destitute, will be not fully fully prepared for the world, will suffer some calamity of some sorts. Maybe medically, they won't go to the doctor and they won't be as productive members of society in the future, etc. That's why I think this is very important. So I am fully on board with adding that back to the bill. Pelosi's move suggests a shift in strategy, adding policies in the bill that can help it in the House, such as paid leave, only to have it stripped in the Senate. So the bills will likely have to ping pong and be sent back and forth between the House and the Senate. Pelosi had insisted for months, including to CNN just this week, she would only move a bill that can pass the Senate. She wanted to spare the moderates a tough vote twice, though no longer seems to be the case. And I think what this is signaling is that she's like, okay, you're going to want to vote against this? Moderates? You want to really do that? Then do it. I don't have to worry about the Senate. I have to worry about the House. My members need this. And while it sucks that, we might not be able to keep Joe Manchin in the House, or in the Senate rather, that's not her problem. I mean, it's everybody's problem, because if the Senate goes Republican, well, we're all screwed, right? None of these things are passing. But maybe this is going to work. Maybe it will get them to get on board a little bit more by making them actually say no to these kind of votes. Okay, where was I? Sorry, I just lost my notes. Okay, so Pelosi has insisted for months ago in her Dear Colleague letter announcing the decision. Pelosi said the paid family and medical leave are being added back into the bill, but also say that she is committed to only passing a bill in the House that can also pass the Senate. Quote, because we must have legislation agreed to by the House and Senate in the final version of the Build Back Better Act that we will send to the president's desk, we must strive to find common ground in the legislation. As we are reviewing priorities and at the urging of many members of the caucus, I have asked the Ways and Means Committee for its legislation for paid family medical leave to be included in this morning's hearing. Another program that looked like it would be left out of the spending bill has been revived in the Senate, lowering the cost of prescription medication for older Americans. Now, it's been revived in the Senate. So this is another good thing. They're trying to win. So these things are happening as these results of the elections that just happened on Tuesday are coming in, and they're dealing with this thing. They have to do these things in order to ensure that they can maintain momentum or get any momentum going into 2022. So you're seeing some of these things that were originally cut because of spending worries and the inflation and all that stuff are getting put back in because they believe that voters are not so much worried about inflation, but being able to afford these important programs. And if these important programs are paid for, then maybe people will more likely vote for them, even if it means a little bit more inflation. Now, let me be clear. These things aren't probably going to cause inflation. If there's not more money circulating in the economy, if it's the same amount money pool circulating in the economy, it's just being guided to different things. If the taxes are still being taken out to pay for them and that sort of thing, it is likely not to increase inflation. This isn't to say that the inflation only happens because of more money in the economy. That's in fact not why inflation happens. Supply and demand is why inflation happens. If you have a supply crunch, which is what we're under a supply crunch, not a demand spike. But if you're in a supply crunch, then you are going to see prices rise regardless of the amount of money circulating in the economy. That should be noted. All right. Let's see. Let me go over to this thing. Let's see. The content. Okay. Pelosi is smart and she realizes right away that the elections are tilting and she needs the further left. True. Also agree on the climate change stuff. His base will run him off if he goes against the coal corporations. Yes. Also true. So maybe it's me. You're giving some great takes today. You're right. I am parched today and I drank plenty of water. All right. Moving on. Let me maximize that so I can see the chat without. There we go. According to NPR, Democrats in Congress have made a big deal, if substantially pared back, step towards lowering prescription drug prices for older Americans, reaching a compromise on the matter after significant infighting on the issue. The move is part of President Biden's Build Back Better social spending plan. The agreement announced Tuesday would allow Medicare Parts B and D to negotiate prices directly with drug manufacturers on certain drugs and cap out-of-pocket expenses for seniors at $2,000 per year. The first innovation of its kind in the program's history. That is huge. Insulin can cost that much alone in a month. So if this is happening, this is going to be a boon for older people and for older people because this is in Medicare. And that's going to be substantial. Now, since Senator Kyrsten Sinema has endorsed the deal, according to NBC News, she, quote, welcomes a new agreement on a historic transformative Medicare drug negotiation plan. Spokesman John Lambert said, adding it will, quote, reduce out-of-pocket costs for seniors, ensuring drug prices cannot raise faster than inflation, save taxpayers' dollars, and protect innovation. And according to Roll Call, Pelosi stopped short of pledging a vote on the measure this week, but with revised text in the hands of the Rules Committee, could reconvene as soon as Wednesday to prep the sweeping package for the floor. Democrats earlier said that the bill this week will, with a bipartisan interest. Democrats earlier said that they were still hoping to pass the bill this week, along with Republicans' report for spiritual budget bill, stuff that we've already discussed as nauseum with this. Other items are still being hammered out. Lawmakers were still trying to forge 11th hour compromises on immigration policy and the details of implementing child care subsidies, which many Democrats want to speed up. Democrats from high-tax states were nearing agreement with party leaders on a potential 5-year suspension of the $10,000 cap on state and local tax deductions, though the break would be paid for by extending the current law cap 5 years beyond its 2026 expiration date. Now, this is an important thing. So a lot of people say that hey there, your stream came up in my suggestion. What topic are we discussing here? Oh, thanks, Clive. We are discussing the news of the past week for everything that happened within the United States. This is as good as time as any. Crowdsourced Politics does a domestic news roundup, domestic to the United States, every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's what we're doing now. Right now, we are talking about the Build Back Better plan and the kind of things that have changed in its direction due to the results of the Tuesday's election, which we covered earlier in this program. So back to this, the SALT. So SALT deductions are state and local tax deductions. These are things that say you live in New York and your state taxes on property taxes are very high. So you have to take, or your income tax in the state of New York is fairly high. Rather than doing what actual double taxation is, they are saying, hey, you paid your state X amount of dollars. That is going to be reduced from your taxable burden to the federal government. Republicans like to say they are against double taxation. But what they mean about that is they don't want capital taxed any higher than it is. In fact, they would rather capital be taxed not at all. But this, hey, fuck those Democrat states. They're going to say that Democrat states shouldn't have those high taxes anyways, and if we can make them suffer a little bit and make the people hate them a little bit more, that's just good politics. And we're going to get them to lower their taxes in their state, just like all our Republican states in the South and Midwest. Looking at you, Texas, where I live. Now, what does that mean, though? Typically, that means less services for everyone else. And I just realized this light wasn't on. And that means that the services that we do have are going to be less good because you can't have good services unless you're willing to pay for them. This is why a lot of states in the South and the Midwest, states that are controlled by Republicans, have poor social services. Texas, for instance, has like the lowest insurance rate in the country, and that's partly due to not expanding Medicare, or Medicaid rather, expanding Medicaid to the population as directed under the Affordable Care Act. So these are the kind of things that we can expect Republicans to push for. Now, one of the things that this is that Dan Crenshaw of Texas said that he's trying to play the Republicans care about the little guy. And I'm going to try to find his tweet here about this. Let's see. Democrats spend years lying about. No, not talking about that. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Here we go. We're going to go look at this. Oh, no, I don't have the... Hold up. I can fix this. There we go. So, that's very weird. Why is it so... What? Oh, I know why. Transform, reset. We're gonna fix this real quick. We're gonna fix this. There we go. And we're gonna go ahead and stretch this to screen. There we go. And zoom in. All right, that should be readable now. So when tax the rich really means let's write catchy slogans on dresses, but actually give the rich a $36,000 tax cut. Yes, this is what Democrats want to put in the reconciliation bill. No, this is not a joke. Price hikes for you, tax cuts for rich New Yorkers. Now, this is masterful act of trolling, because the reason that they are against this isn't because they don't want taxes to be lowered. Like I already said, they want taxes to be lowered. They want to also fuck Democrats. And by doing this, it shows that the top 1% would see a $35,000 potential tax decrease. Now, the reason for that is because, like I said, states with higher taxes for their services, the rich pay more money to those states, and therefore shouldn't necessarily pay that money to the federal government. And so this is masterful. This is 100% good, kind of pointing towards hypocrisy. Now, is it really hypocrisy? I'm not sure, because they're going to put this in the reconciliation bill, right? But raise taxes elsewhere. And what they're trying to say here is that because of Democrat policy, we're seeing inflation. And not only that, you're going to see higher prices because of the taxes they're going to put in on other things. Because God forbid rich people make a little less money on their transactions of any kind, whether it's oil, stock trades, selling their house, what have you. God forbid that happens and they take a little less money, put a little more money into the economy. So that's why they're saying this. All right, back to the news roundup. So moving on once again. Oops. All right. Oh man, I hate this. All right. Now, immigration is another key provision of the Build Back Better plan. Believe it or not, because it would lower cost of immigration and streamline its services. So this is one of the key provisions for the bill. The fate of the immigration provisions intended to create a pathway to citizenship for millions remains in doubt because the language is subject to a ruling from the Senate parliamentarian on whether it can be included in a reconciliation bill. The Senate's Byrd rule, which limits can be considered to items that have more than a merely incidental impact on the federal budget. Progressives don't want to wait on the parliamentarian to vote in the House, but some centrists are objecting to voting on contentious provisions that may get dropped in the Senate. The Biden administration has insisted the package would be fully paid for with almost $2 trillion in new revenue over the coming decade to fund the $1.75 trillion worth of measures to expand the social safety net and combat climate change, though they are included as a placeholder $100 billion for immigration-related costs. On Tuesday, Manchin wouldn't say much about other than he's not going to negotiate in public. He didn't appear too concerned about the House plowing ahead with a vote potentially as early this week. The House can do what it wants, Manchin said. As of this afternoon, Manchin and Sinema are signaling they're comfortable with the top line coming down to $1.75 trillion from $3.5, with Sinema even reassuring fellow Democrats she's largely on board with the policies proposed by Biden. This is good news for many of the bill's policy provisions where Democrats have generally agreement, including childcare, home and community-based services, universal pre-K, climate, prescription drug pricing, so on and so forth. As he left the Capitol on Thursday afternoon for a week-long recess, Manchin said he didn't control the clock, while Schumer weighs putting the Biden-blessed bill on the floor ASAP. Asked if he would support his leader's schedule, Manchin got in his car and then shrugged theatrically. Meh. Earlier in the day, Manchin said on MSNBC that Democrats should slow down on the social spending bill and wait to see if inflation is transitory. Senator Christian Gillibrand, Democrat of New York, also signaled in an interview that her negotiations with Manchin on paid leave are not done. There's still an open door. Some Senate Democrats are privately worried that the talks could drag further once the climate and safety net legislation comes over from the House, which left one caucus member speaking candidly but anonymously very concerned. Any prolonged Senate discussions on the social spending bill would run up against the chamber's other deadlines, including December 3rd, end date for the current government funding, the expiring debt limit patch, and the need to pass an annual defense bill. We're trying to avoid that, obviously, said Senator Bob Casey, Democrat from Pennsylvania, of a lengthy back and forth with the House. There should be an alignment so that we don't have to have a third chapter on this. Now, one of the things that we are doing new for the news roundup is a what the fuck news break. So earlier this week, to talk about that, we are going to look at a very interesting thing where QAnoners thought that John Kennedy Jr. was going to rise from the dead and facilitate Donald Trump's return to the White House because apparently he wasn't actually assassinated on the day that he was assassinated. It was a body double. He's actually like a King Arthurian figure going to rise when we most need him and install the hero that we need, Donald Trump. Lead the country into its glory. That shining city on a hill, folks. Seriously, this is what they believed. A rally in Dallas signaled this. So let's see. Can I get some YouTube? Let me see if I can find a YouTube QAnon rally JFK Dallas. Oh, look at this. So we're gonna the Associated News. There we go. So we'll go ahead and put this on while I talk about it because it's funny. It's funny, y'all. All right. So play.
It is almost 12:29.
Oh, hold up. I need to change the window. I need to change my window. The window. The window. The window and the tulip trees. I know there's links in the copy. I didn't see the video link when I was going through, so I'm sorry. Let's see. Yeah, I just wanted a video link. I know there's links here. Is this a video link? Yeah, these aren't going. These are just going to like hodgepodge stuff. So I appreciate your help on this, Nikki. Don't think that your work isn't appreciated. I just wanted a video to have over this while I talked about it. That's all. That's all. So give me 1 second, everybody. I'm sorry for this. It's slowing up. There we go. All right, go here.
It is almost 12:29.
There we go.
Any minute now.
Any minute
Big
now.
Reveal.
He's going to be back, everybody. JFK is going to come back to life and usher in the supreme Trump presidency for life. And if you can hear in the end of that little clip that it was one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for Trump. So what does this mean? I don't know what this means. I think people are cray-cray, but it is interesting. So moving on with this, QAnon true believers, and for those that lived under the rock for the last, 2 years, true believers are people that believe that there's like this grand conspiracy cabal of every single kind of massive conspiracy that ever existed, plus the Jews and aliens and everything else are actually leading the United States government, and Trump is the one person that can save us all from everything that we fear because he's strong or something. I don't know. But they believe that JFK was going to come back. And they gathered en masse Tuesday morning in anticipation of the return of Camelot. Because again, King Arthur. The crowds chose to meet in Dealey Plaza and lined themselves around the large white X that marked the spot where his father, JFK, was assassinated in 1963. Dozens wore Tiffany blue, a color associated with Kennedy Klan, as well as shirts that read JFK or Trump/JFK Jr. 2020. Dozens of QAnon supporters started gathering in the AT&T Discovery Plaza in downtown Dallas last night to commemorate the glorious return of JFK Jr., a man who, again, it must be emphasized, has failed to convert oxygen into carbon dioxide for more than 2 decades. Trump reinstated as the 19th president, calls up a new vice president, JFK Jr., wrote a prominent QAnon influencer with more than 250,000 followers on encrypted messaging app Telegram. The influencer added that Trump's reinstatement stems from the fact that everything from 1871 was illegal and unconstitutional, a reference to this convoluted far right-wing conspiracy aimed at invalidating Biden's presidency, by suggesting that an obscure law from the late 19th century renders every law passed and president elected since as illegitimate. Trump will step down. John will become president, the post reads, adding that the disgraced former general and QAnon celebrity Michael Flynn would become his vice president. The feverishly fantasy concludes by claiming that Trump will become one of the 7 new kings, most likely the King of Kings, a reference to a biblical passage in Revelations 17. My God, I can't. Why do people believe the Left Behind series is prophecy? I don't understand. I don't get it. Maybe it isn't me. He was on the grassy knoll doing bong rips with Oswald's ghost laughing about it. Hell yes. That's the kind of conspiracy theory that I want to see. The expectation among some attendants was that JFK Jr. would reveal himself along with his father, JFK Sr., to great fanfare. "We're expecting a parade," said a woman named Guinea who had come all the way from Nebraska. "JFK is going to be here." Guinea then went on to describe her belief that many dead celebrities are actually alive and a part of a secret plan to save America, and that there will be a big reveal later tonight at the Rolling Stones concert at the Cotton Bowl Stadium in Dallas. Robin Williams was here the other day. Michael Jackson's high in the movement. Every attendee who was willing to chat appeared to sincerely believe that something big was going to happen. Many specifically mentioned the JFK theory. That was certainly the case for Mike Penny, who also is a bit of a QAnon influencer in his own right, having appeared in YouTube videos with Portsman. "It's the beginning of the end," Penny told Rolling Stone. When asked when he was expecting to see JFK, he said, "Sometime today." Several attendees mentioned 12/29 as the specific time that they were expected, the Deus Ex Machina, noting that it was the time that JFK was shot 58 years ago. But for whatever reason, no one explained why they didn't choose to meet on the day JFK was shot, November 22nd. Perhaps it was a typographical error. Or perhaps that's too close to Thanksgiving and no one's got time for that. It's family time. When 12/29 rolled around, the only thing that happened was a group recital of the Pledge of Allegiance. Still, the crowd stuck around for several hours, even as heavy rain started to pour down, because God cried that his creations could be so duped. So, what does this say? Oh man, when's Tupac and Biggie? You know what? They didn't mention anybody that wasn't white. Ain't that something? Oh, wait, they mentioned Michael Jackson, so I take that back. I don't know why they mentioned Michael Jackson. Maybe they don't like rap. I think that's probably what it is. They just don't like rap. I mean, these are going to be skewed older people anyways, and rap didn't really become a thing until the 90s. They were already pushing 40 by then. That music was after their time. Now, moving on to the G20 Summit. Last week, President Biden joined leaders of 19 other countries in Rome for a meeting that intended to foster global economic cooperation. The agenda for the summit included climate change, the COVID pandemic, a landmark tax deal, and global economy. First up, climate change. Leaders committed to the key Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels pledged action against dirty coal plants, but fell short on a target of zero emissions. Keeping 1.5 degrees within reach will require meaningful and effective action and commitment by all countries, taking into account different approaches, the G20 said in their first communique. They also pledged to reach a target of net zero carbon emissions by or around the mid-century, instead of setting a clear 2050 date, as campaigners and summit host Italy was hoping for. Elsewhere in the statement, they agreed to stop funding new dirty coal plants abroad by the end of 2021 and reaffirmed that the so far unmet commitment to mobilize $100 billion for developing countries for climate adaptation cost. Now, this is important. This is the thing that a lot of people get angry about and don't necessarily fully understand. So this goal, this adaptating for climate change, is a $100 billion fund that is designed to allow industrializing nations and future industrializing nations to basically skip coal and natural gas to meet their energy needs. The way they would go about this is to building slightly more expensive, at this point it's slightly more expensive, wind and solar farms in countries like Niger, Egypt, South Africa, in countries in South America, and the like, in order to skip coal. Because coal is the dirtiest energy source. And it is one of those things that we probably shouldn't be relying on anymore, especially when there's alternatives that exist. Among them, what I just said, but also nuclear energy. Now, nuclear energy is a little trickier, and there's environmentalists that are not too keen on it, but I think those environmentalists are wrong. So if you want to actually talk to an environmentalist that is pro-nuclear energy, you should go follow Your Environment Seattle on Twitter. And he does streaming on Twitch. I'm going to grab his social link directly from Twitter and share that instead, because I don't know when he streams. So Your Environment Seattle. Oh, come on. Man, I can never find things when I need them, like, right away, you know? Can I search? And you know what? I bet I find him. I bet I can find his social stuff here. Yeah, come on. Let's do this. Really? All right. Come on, show me your profile. Show me your profile. There we go. Sorry about this, everybody, but I have to share his stuff because he's good people. He is, and he's also very knowledgeable in this, far more knowledgeable than I am. So I would be remiss if I didn't direct other people to go check him out. So go ahead and check him out at the link I just dropped. Or wait, I got to drop it in the right chat. At the link I just dropped, twitter.com, Carl Axelis. For Your Environmental Seattle. He does a lot of good work and interviews actual climate scientists and the like from his Seattle, Washington. So moving on to more news stuff. So that's what that is. So that's what the $100 billion is for. People want to call it a slush fund. $100 billion is basically nothing, especially when it's coming from multiple countries. It's what it's designed for. Is there going to be graft with it? Maybe. I mean, probably. Let's be real, probably. But if it helps countries actually skip coal, I don't really see anything wrong with it, to be honest. Now, leaders for the first time also acknowledged that the use of carbon pricing mechanics and incentives as a possible tool against climate change, just as International Monetary Fund is calling on the most polluting countries to go down that path by setting minimum carbon price. Now, carbon pricing is what in America we would call cap and trade. And this is the idea that you're able to set a price on the emissions from from any kind of fossil fuel plant, even cars, and you tax that emission either at the price of sale when it's at the price of sale. So you tax that, like when you sell a car, there's a lifetime emissions thing, or you tax it on the gas. So you don't necessarily tax them on both ends. It's just different ways to do it. So tax the gas gun, you have a slightly higher gas price that incentivizes people to buy more fuel efficient vehicles, which incentivizes people to produce more fuel efficient vehicles and maybe end up getting an electric car. That's just one example. Same thing with coal. And then on the other side of it, you allow farmers and other producers of agricultural product or that have land to be able to sell carbon credits to people in order to offset their emissions, to lower their prices, to lower the prices of their production, but also increase the amount of carbon that we're taking out of the atmosphere. So that is how this kind of thing goes about. So that is one of the things that they're talking about, and it's honestly is a pretty good idea when it comes to managing climate. I would just rather it go the way that Canada is doing it with the carbon dividend, where there's a prebate based on expected carbon tax revenue, and so it offsets the price for the average person, but it doesn't offset the price of the major producers, so that a person that just needs to get back and forth to work doesn't experience that huge hit to their pocketbook, but is still incentivized to go and get a more fuel efficient car, an electric car, if they can afford it, etc. And if they can't afford it, then that cost rise doesn't actually impact them too much, if at all. Depends on how big the carbon is. I personally like that one better. So there's also the taxation. So leaders also put their seal of approval on an agreement that will subject multinationals to a minimum 15% tax as part of an effort to build a more stable and fairer international tax system. U.S. interest giants such as Amazon, Google parent Alphabet, Facebook, and Apple, which have benefited from seeing themselves in low tax countries to minimize their tax bill, are particular targets of this new global regulation. They have their corporate headquarters in Ireland, some foreign countries that do some tax havens in the United States. The idea is to have a minimum 15% tax across the board, so you can't avoid those taxes just by moving your headquarters overseas. The reform, brokered by the OECD, the Office of Economic Central Development, and backed by 136 countries representing more than 90% of the world's GDP, has long been in the making and is supposed to come into effect in 2023, but the deadline is at risk of slipping. Each country taking part in the global deal must first pass national legislation, and US President Joe Biden is among those facing tough domestic opposition to the plan. Political opposition to the plan. Regular folk don't give a shit. All right? Regular folk think, yes, businesses should probably pay a little bit more. Businesses probably shouldn't be able to avoid all these taxes just by claiming that they're actually, all their tax money is actually owed to Barbados or some other tax haven, or Delaware, for fuck's sake. Delaware is another fucking state that does a lot of LLC bullshittery. And I don't mean to actually pick on Barbados. Barbados isn't one of those. Maldives have some tax havens. Sweden has tax havens. Ireland has tax havens. So let's get that out of the way. But the point is that they're trying to avoid taxes by moving their corporate headquarters, which is not really actually moved there. It's just what they have their fucking their headquarters status at. They don't have workers there necessarily. And to avoid these taxes. Nevertheless, the G20 calls on relevant working groups within the OECD and G20 to swiftly develop the model rules and multilateral instruments within a view to ensure that the new rules will come into effect at a global level in 2023. Might surprise some, yet I am for nuclear power. The old Red Scare shit doesn't bother me or make me fear Chernobyl. Was it Red Scare that did Chernobyl, or was it just the fact that it was really bad? I don't know. Moving on. Vaccines. Leaders vowed to support the WHO's goal of vaccinating at least 40% of the world's population against COVID-19 by 2021 and 70% by the middle of next year by boosting the supply of vaccines in developing countries and removing supply and financing constraints. They also promised to work together toward the recognition of COVID-19 vaccines deemed safe and effective by the WHO after a complaint during a summit talks by Russia President Vladimir Putin about lack of international approval for Moscow's Sputnik V jab. Global economy, meaning as rising inflation. While inflation is rising, pushed by spikes in energy prices and supply chain bottlenecks are weighing on the world economy, still reeling from COVID-related disruptions, G20 leaders ruled out a hasty removal of national stimulus measures. We will continue to sustain the recovery, avoiding any premature withdrawal of support measures while preserving financial stability and long-term fiscal sustainability and safeguarding against downside risk and negative spillovers, they said. Regarding inflation, they said central banks are monitoring current prices dynamics closely and will act as needed to meet the mandates, including price stability, while looking through inflation pressures where they are transitory and remaining committed to clear communication of policy stances. Finally, the G20 leaders pledged to remain vigilant to the global challenges that impacting our economies, such as disruptions in the supply chain, and monitor and address these issues as our economy recovers. Now, the reason that they are wary of pulling back too soon is because that's what most countries did after the Great Recession. America, Britain being on the forefront of those. And by pulling back too soon, they actually slowed their recovery and prolonged the recession more than it needed to be done. So they would rather quote unquote, superheat the economy and for a little bit have a little more inflation than prolong the suffering of millions of people simply because, oh my God, inflation is scary. So that's why they're doing this. It gives you some context. All right. Another key issue for leaders is developmental aid. Leaders set a new target of channeling $100 billion toward poorest nations coming from the $650 billion pot made available by the International Monetary Fund via a fresh issuance of its special drawing rights. Special drawing rights, or SDRs, are not a currency but can be used by developing countries either as a reserve currency that stabilizes the value of their domestic currency or converted into stronger currencies to finance investments. For poorer countries, the interest is also to obtain hard currencies without having to pay substantial interest rates. So this is an agreement that is between the International Monetary Fund and various governments around the world in order to allow lowered interest rates of loans through the International Monetary Fund and avoid the common loan market. That is what is up. Now, there was another weird conspiracy theory of sorts that happened in another kind of what the fuck moment. That a rumor went wild when pictures of Biden's meeting with the Pope appeared to show that Biden had to change his suit in the course of the meeting. A right-wing commentator suggested that Biden had to change his suit because the POTUS shit his pants. I shit you not. This is something that people are actually taking seriously. PolitiFact confirmed that despite photographs that appeared to show the president wearing a black suit and a blue suit, it was the same suit throughout the meeting. PolitiFact rated the rumor pants on fire. Now, this is a very common thing, especially with dark blue suits, is that depending on the lighting, it can appear in photos that you are wearing a black suit when you're wearing a midnight blue suit. You're wearing a midnight blue suit on a black sky. If you get that reference, you're people. You're my people. All right, so this is the first time that you've ever watched the News Roundup, hi, welcome. My name is Cypher, also known as Anthony, and this is the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. The News Roundup is hosted every Thursday from 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. One of the things that you may not know, and people that have watched the show for a bit might also not know or remember, is that the Crowdsourced Politics is part of the Crowdsourced Tribune. The Crowdsourced Tribune is a registered not-for-profit in the state of Texas that houses our intellectual property, the show, websites, podcast, etc., and works to better the dialogue and discourse of American politics and social commentary through not only education, but our own example. And in that light, because of that, we created the Crowdsourced Tribune in order to further this mission. So if that is something that you're interested in, you can always either drop some donos, subscribe to this channel, and those things help us not only do the things that we do on this show on a regular basis, but also fund cool little things like contests, and makes us self-sustaining and the ability to produce more content, either through hiring editors, paying even people on our own staff, and things of that nature. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can go ahead and support us with the support link, which should come in shortly, or you can support us by following, liking, subscribe, share us with your friends, everybody. So moving on, COP26. Last week, President Biden traveled to Glasgow. I'm sorry, hold on, I need some water. Man, I just get parched when I talk so much. I've drank plenty of water today too. Last week, President Biden traveled to Glasgow for the 26th United Nations Climate Change Conference of the Parties, commonly referred to as COP. According to the New York Times, the Group of 20 is an organization of finance ministers and central bank governors from 19 individual countries and the European Union. Formerly, the Summit on Financial Markets and the World Economy, the G20 meeting, is an annual gathering of finance ministers and heads of state representing those members. It bills itself as the premier forum for international economic cooperation. The heads of state first convened officially in November of 2008 as the global financial crisis began to unfold. According to Bloomberg, world leaders wrapped up 2 days of climate talks with pledges on protecting forests and curbing methane emissions, as UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned that promises must be matched with real action. Johnson continues to press China to step up its targets, while Beijing said it's up to rich countries to do more, because Beijing is still trying to play the game that we're a poor country. Beijing being China, China's still trying to play that it's poor. Now, a lot of its population is poor, and it is still very much developing. They're still relying on coal in order to cheaply provide power for their people. But it can also do more. It can wield the levers of its economy to guide it to do more things. I mean, for fuck's sake, they built an entire city powered off of solar panels and wind with battery capacity, so they never had to use coal. And that city sat empty for 10 years? I think there's barely anybody living in it still. So these are things that China can do. It's just a matter of willpower and wanting to spend the money on this rather than other things, like it is with most other countries. So Beijing, China, is wrong and right at the same time. As developed world leaders hailed their own progress, island nations and those most vulnerable to climate change railed angrily against the lack of action to protect them from existential threats. And the reason that these nations have done so is because as temperatures rise, the global sea level rises as well and endangers these countries directly. It is estimated the Maldives will be gone if things are not done to stem the tide of climate change. I believe it's by 2075. Most of the Maldive Islands will be underwater. A lot of islands in the Philippines will also be underwater. And so these things are important. These are going to create climate refugees. And what's better, to create climate refugees or to prevent the climate catastrophe? I think preventing the climate catastrophe, if we can, which there's still evidence says that we can, is the better option. Now, the focus was on emissions and coal. The combination of the commitments made by world leaders at the summit could limit global heating to 1.8 centigrade. According to Damien Carrington for The Guardian, the International Energy Agency has crunched the numbers and reckons that combining the new pledges to cut emissions made by nations, most notably India, with the plan for 90 countries to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030 would mean global temperature rise would be limited to 1.8 centigrade. And Reuters reports that Britain called on an end to the era of coal on Thursday, saying that it had 77 signatures to a pledge to phase out the dirtiest of the fossil fuels that cause global warming, as a study showed carbon dioxide emissions had rebounded to near pre-pandemic levels. But the list omitted both India and China, which is home to almost half of the over 2,600 coal-fired plants operating or under construction around the world, and the pledge contained no commitment to stop financing new plants. Britain called on an end to the era of coal on Thursday, saying the 77 signature pledge. But the list, that's weird. The United Nations says a rise in the 1.5 centigrade would trigger potentially irreversible climate impacts that would dwarf the intensifying storms, heat waves, droughts, and floods that the planet is already experiencing. Carbon dioxide emissions fell by 5.4% in 2020 as economics grounded to a halt, but the new report by the Global Carbon Project forecasts that this will rebound by 4.9% this year. British president of the 2-week meeting announced details of a pledge to phase out coal-fueled power plants, which produce more than 35% of the world's electricity, and stop building new ones. Britain had said that it expected 190 countries and organizations to sign the non-binding pledge, in which richer nations would phase out coal power plants by 2040 and the poorer ones by 2050. Demand for coal, the world's most widely used fuel, is set to hit a new record this year. If it happened, who cares? I'm almost 52 and occasionally lose control too. Hello. Oh, I don't know what you're referring to. Sorry, I'm bad at keeping up with chat when I can't have it like directly in front of me because I'm reading. I'm sorry. So if you have any ideas and want us to cover anything on the News Roundup, or would like to join us on the News Roundup panel, here's how to let us know. Join the Discord. The Discord, you can find a link in the top here on both YouTube and Twitch. You can also join the Discord through this link, which should be dropping in Twitch. And I'm hoping it drops in YouTube as well. If it doesn't, the bot is broken and I don't know how to fix it because I've changed it like 8 times and I'll have to have somebody else help us. But the Discord is where it's at. We will hold, hey, it worked. Look at that. Awesome. So it will hold, we'll hold contests there. We talk about different things. We have different channels set up for everything that we like to talk about. And that's where you can find us most of the day. Just a bullshit around or what have you. You can also find us at Facebook, at the Facebook group, which is Facebook.com/groups/Tribune Commons, where we run a Facebook group of roughly 500 members with a wider community of about 2,000 or so from various different groups that we interact with. And that is also where you can talk about politics in more long form than what it would be conducive of, say, Discord or Twitter. Speaking of Twitter, we also have a Twitter where you can see memes, and whatever else I feel like posting of the day. Twitter is probably the easiest way to get a hold of me directly now. And so if you would like to get a hold of me, go ahead and hit us up at Crowdsourced with an ED poll on Twitter, where again, we'll likely be using Twitter to hold our contest for memes and other things in the future as well. So that is where you can find us. We also do have a website, crowdsourcedpolitics.org, but it is currently in a rebuild phase. And once it is up and running, it will have a slew of different things where we'll also be producing articles like a real news organization for you all to read and share, that it's either opinion pieces or not just opinion pieces, but reporting news of the day. Things that we find interesting that we want to give additional context to without so much of the opinion stuff, maybe on there in the future. And if that's something that you're interested in, stay tuned for that. So moving on, we have a slew of Supreme Court updates that we need to share with y'all. So let's go ahead and get started with that. First up, the court agrees to hear an EPA regulation case. As President Biden headed off to the climate summit, the court agreed to review the scope of the EPA's authority to limit emissions from power plants. From the Scientific American, the justices sent shockwaves through the legal world when they agreed Friday to consider a consolidated challenge from Republican-led states and coal companies stemming from a federal court ruling that struck down a Trump-era regulation gutting EPA's climate rule for power plants. This case is expected to be reviewed next summer. Now, the reason that it shocked people in the legal world is because, generally speaking, if it has to do with an EPA regulation, the courts have actually taken a step back and allowed the president to have the authority vested in it by the EPA Act that was passed in during the Nixon administration. And by actually going against it, the court is flexing its political muscles, which a lot of lawyers don't like. Okay? Now, that shouldn't surprise anyone because the court is supposed to be politically unbiased. But when it starts to do these things going against precedent that it itself had set for decades, it raises eyebrows and people start scratching their heads. Now, this also is this is starting to be somewhat of a common theme with the court in regards to also its refusal to allow the Biden administration to overturn immigration regulations that Trump had put into place. We'll be talking about that as well. So we're also going to be about SB 8. The court heard oral arguments Monday in 2 challenges to the Texas heartbeat law, also known as SB 8. SB 8 is the law that allowed private citizens to sue regular folks that helped in the administration of abortion, allowing the state to say, hey, we're not violating anybody's rights. It's a civil matter, and that's how we're going to do this. So according to the SCOTUS blog reporting, the 2 cases before the Supreme Court were 2 different efforts to challenge the law. One case, Whole Women's Health versus Jackson, began in July as an effort by abortion providers to block the law before it was scheduled to go into effect. The Department of Justice filed the second one, United States versus Texas, in early September after the court declined an emergency request from the abortion providers to put SB 8 on hold. According to the Associated Press, Justice Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, 2 conservative appointees of former President Trump, voted in September to allow the law to take effect, but they raised questions Monday about its novel structure. The law, written to make it difficult to mount legal challenges, subjects clinics, doctors, and others who facilitate abortion to large legal fines. Millions and millions of retroactively imposed, even though the activity was perfectly lawful under all court orders and precedent at the time it was undertaken, right? Kavanaugh asked, one of the several skeptical questions he put to Judd E. Stone II, representing Texas. Let's read that again. Millions and millions retroactively imposed, even though the activity was perfectly legal under all court orders and precedent at the time it was undertaken. This is a effort that the Republicans wrote into the bill to make it to where if the law was overturned by the Supreme Court and then reinstated, if it was overturned by a district court and then reinstated by the Supreme Court, then the retroactively abortions could then be sued again. Like, come on. And so the way that the law's language is also written allows people to sue for past abortions that happened before the law took effect because they wrote it crappily to try to navigate this legal framework where they thought they could get away with this. So that's why this is being questioned, like eyebrow raising, even by Justice Kavanaugh. Barrett, too, a person that is many believe to be one of the most religious people in the court, pressed Stone about provisions of the law that force providers to fight lawsuits one by one, and said she said, don't allow the constitutional rights to be fully aired. Now, the reason that it forces the providers to fight it one by one is because the goal of the law is to, while it's in effect, bankrupt abortion providers. So if you make them have to challenge each case individually rather than challenge all the cases collectively that fall under its purview, then that is more money that it has to spend, and that makes it very difficult to run your business. The justices sounded less convinced that the Justice Department lawsuit should go forward, and Justice Elena Kagan suggested that a ruling instead in favor of the providers would allow the court to avoid difficult issues of federal power. So this is another interesting thing. So with the federal law is suing on behalf of the Constitution in general and saying that a state law can't violate this Constitution, and this runs head up against the 10th Amendment, where you have states being the first line of hearings for any kind of constitutional right. And if you allow the federal government to sue about this, then you can get thorny issues and make the federal government's power more broad than you intended in this thing. So that's why she is saying that it might not be good to have the federal case go forward and allow all the rulings to be done under the state case or under the plaintiff for the let me read that again, for the Women's Health organization. Arguing for the United States, Solicitor General Elizabeth Logger told the justices that Texas law was enacted in open defiance of Supreme Court precedent. It enacted a law that clearly violates the court's precedents, she said. The justices will hear a separate challenge to those decisions in a case over Mississippi's ban on abortion after 15 weeks. Those arguments are set for December 1st. Most questions from the justices have focused on Texas law and how it altered abortion in the state, even though the high court hasn't made any change in abortion law. Kagan told Stone that until Texas passed its law, no state dreamed of trying to make an end run around the Supreme Court precedent in the same way. If the Supreme Court doesn't do anything about that, the Solicitor General said it would be inviting many states to try to flaunt precedent. Guns, same-sex marriage, religious rights, whatever you don't like, go ahead, she said. Kagan, who disagreed with her colleague's decision to let the law take effect, said Texas law has prevented women in Texas from exercising a constitutional right. Kavanaugh also raised questions about laws that might affect other constitutional rights. During arguments on Monday, Roberts at one point asked whether the law could be challenged if Texas had made the entitlement much higher, 1 million. Texas lawyers told him no. Stone and Jonathan Mitchell, an architect of the law who also argued Monday, defended the law and its unusual structure. They said that both the providers and the Justice Department lacked the right to go into federal court and should be asking Congress, not the justices, to expand court access. Wow, so that's a doozy. Now let's tackle this one. So Kavanaugh raised concerns about laws that might affect other constitutional rights. Well, I said it before and I'll say it again, folks. What it real boils down to is that some Democratic pundits and others said, fine, you want to play ball? We'll play ball. And we're coming for your guns. And we're going to come for your guns the same way you came for abortion. And this is just going to go to rough and tumble until we end up having a second civil war, because that's where this is headed. If this shit doesn't stop. Because tit for tat is the way you get back into the shitstorm. And so that is where Kavanaugh, I believe, is, and why I changed my opinion of him not breaking ranks with the rest of the conservative justices to break ranks, because this is a bad precedent to set, and he has some sense. I suspect that Thomas might also break ranks with the conservative justices, and it'll be left to Amy, Alito, and Thomas, Alito, Kavanaugh. Yeah, Amy and Alito. I think it might very well be a 7-2 decision, but we shall see. And you will see with us when we report on it once the case is ruled upon. Now there is more rights coming at you. So oral arguments in New York gun law have also begun. The New York law requires people seeking a license to carry a handgun in public to show a proper cause, and a majority of the justices seem prepared to say that it imposes an intolerable burden on the rights guaranteed by the Second Amendment. But several justices seemed open to allowing states to exclude guns from crowded public settings or other sensitive places. Other sensitive places being bars, restaurants, etc. The Second Amendment protects the constitutional right just as the First Amendment does, Chief Justice John Roberts said. People seeking to exercise either of those rights, he said, should not have to demonstrate to the government that they have a good reason or special need to do so. And he is correct about this. Now, states, even Scalia said that states that the Second Amendment, just like the First Amendment, isn't a, what was his statement? No law is absolute. It's not an absolute right. There are mitigating circumstances that the government can say to make laws that enshrine rights, that the government has a vested interest sometimes in making laws that might seem to be absolute, not absolute. The famous case is yelling fire in a crowded theater. Another case is incitement to violence. These are things that are that would be considered against the First Amendment, but have been recognized to not be in the purview of the First Amendment due to a competing interest of the state. And so these are what he's talking about. You don't have to say when you're looking for a permit to speak on a street corner or whatever that you know your speech is particularly important, he said. So why do you have to show this case, convince somebody that you're entitled to exercise your Second Amendment right? At the same time, the Chief Justice was among the justices who asked whether guns could be barred at a setting as varied as subways, protest, Yankee Stadium, Times Square on New Year's Eve, and college campuses in New York City. Justice Elena Kagan responded that most people think that Chicago is like the world's worst city with respect to gun violence. Justice Brett Kavanaugh said that the court should limit its ruling to what he called the permitting regime. Now, what he means by this permitting regime is that the law should be tailored to the facts of the case and not be interpreted more broadly to carve out more exceptions that preempt states from being able to try different things. And so that if it's a permit that you're applying for open carry, concealed carry, whatever, then you shouldn't have to prove an additional proper use cause for this, just like you wouldn't have to, again, said earlier, of other amendments. And that's what he's saying. He wants it to be narrow tailored to this so that it doesn't expand and run afoul of other things, because states are the laboratories of democracy, yada, yada, yada. There was much discussion of history, including repeated references to the Statute of Northampton of 1328, which appeared to forbid carrying arms to fairs and markets, and is cited by some proponents of gun regulations, evidence that the founders did not intend the Second Amendment to preclude limits on public carrying of arms. And this is one of those situations that even in like cities during the Revolution, or before the Revolution, and etc., would have different rules for how you carried a weapon around city limits. You would have to have it slung. If you unslung it from your shoulder, that was considered brandishing, even if you were not intending to fire it at anybody, and you would be fined and possibly jailed. So these are different things that did exist in history that point to that it is not an absolute right to do whatever the fuck you want. Scotta's blog reported on oral arguments in a landmark Second Amendment case when Wednesday's oral argument in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Byrne, the case that we're talking about, drew to close roughly 2 hours of its debate. It seemed likely that New York's 108-year-old handgun licensing law is in jeopardy. But the justice's eventual ruling might be a narrow one focused on New York law and others like it, saving broader questions of rights to carry outside the home for later, as previously stated. All right, what else? Let's see. Oh, this is a huge one. This is an interesting one. This is something that I heard about on NPR while I was driving to work and driving back from work. And this is a police reform that actually got passed and seems to be supported by police. Philadelphia has banned low-level traffic stops. And by low-level traffic stops, they mean things like seatbelt ordinances, one traffic taillight being out, maybe your license plate being obscured, etc. Things that don't pose actual public safety issues, and therefore removing police from interacting with the public that can lead to negative consequences, particularly the negative consequence with Filet and Castile. So it has become the first state in the nation to ban police officers from making low-level traffic stops after Mayor Jimmy signed an executive order this week, so-called driving equality law. The law aims to end stops for violations like broken taillights and expired inspection stickers, and echoes similar measures enacted in Virginia in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. Critics have long argued that the police use such infractions to target people of color, and they've come under scrutiny in recent years, and high-profile police killings of people like Walter Scott in South Carolina and Daunte Wright in Minnesota. The council member behind the law, Aisha Thomas, said in a statement that the measure was necessary to end traffic stops that promote discrimination rather than public safety. According to data provided by NBC News by Thomas's office, 72% of Black Philadelphia residents were pulled over by police during a 12-month period. 72% of Black residents. That means nearly every single Black resident of Philadelphia was pulled over for some minor traffic violation. Jesus fucking Christ. Now, nearly all of these stops were for code violations that didn't warrant a ticket. Thomas office said, and guns or illegal drugs were found in less than 1% of these stops. Giving credence to the fact that police have said, well, this helps us prevent crime, more serious crime, is bullshit. The new measure, which gives the police department 120 days to train officers before taking effect, turns what had been considered a primary violation into a secondary one. In a statement, the department linked it to seatbelt infractions. Essentially, this means that the officer must witness another more high-level safety violation to make a stop and can then only cite the individual or the seatbelt violation during these stops, the department said. Officers do not use the seatbelt violation as a primary reason for a stop. The law, the department noted, will allow officers to enforce infractions in a way that reduces racial inequalities, heals police-community relations, and allows us to protect public safety while simultaneously safeguarding the constitutional rights of our community. Now, this is important. The police union and the police department of Philadelphia was actually given a say in the law's creation and is actually backing the law. They are backing the law because, again, what happened to Florence Castile, but they're also backing the law because they feel it is a waste of time. And they're mostly right. With the reason that we see that 72% disparity might be because of bias in police officers. There's been multiple studies on police traffic stops, looking at racial differences and the like, in the cover of darkness, where the amount of black people that had been stopped for minor infractions during night patrols, where police officers are sometimes have more of a prevalence, dropped substantially. We're talking like a 50% drop between day and night, pulling over black people. And when you look at different data in regards to how black motorists are pulled over, a lot of the pullovers, there's a disparity between black and white, Hispanic and Asian Americans, and any other demographic group, with black people being pulled over more often for very minor violations, and being pulled over more with no reason given at all for why they were pulled over. So removing these laws from being allowed to be a pullover offense will increase will make community relations better between black people and the police, in my opinion. And I think this is a great kind of effect of law that should be probably a template going forward. It is the bare minimum of the things that we can do, but it is something, and it will have a good impact, in my opinion. Now, to wrap it up a little bit, in a statement to NBC News, Philadelphia Police Union President John McNesby slammed the law as terrible and called an all-out effort of local police politicians to claim a win for police reform. Now, the police departments themselves and members said that it was good. The police unions tend to be a bit more political. They're a bit more political. They tend to overrepresent their members in certain things. So while the police union is against us, the police officers themselves, captains, higher ranked police officers and stuff and such, appear to be actually in support of the law. Now, what he goes on to say is that we simply ask the public to follow all laws which are written to keep everyone safe. What it boils down to, in my opinion, for this particular case, is that they're worried that if police officers aren't, quote unquote, meeting quota, that they'll have more police officers being fired and less police officers being hired, which in turn diminishes the political power of the police union and their members. I think that's what this really boils down to. All right. Now, if this is the first time you joined the News Roundup, we like to close out the News Roundup with a bit of just funny news, some news of a segment we like to call News of the Weird. Now, in this, we will be watching a video from CNN about a possum being eaten by a spider. Wow, that's crazy. That's crazy. So let's go ahead and do that once this little ad. There we go. Hold on. Pause. Come on, pause. All right, load that up. All right, it takes me a minute to no, not video cuts. Yeah, there we go. I clicked on the wrong button. I'm sorry. And there we go. All right. All right. This. Oh, I gotta unmute it. There we go. Look at this nonsense. Look at this. Look how big that spider is. Holy shit. Holy shit. Don't eat my trash, Panda. You're a bad spider. Bad spider. Scientists say it appeared. Hold on. Why did I do that? I'm going to read it to you because I know my stuff is blocking it. So, scientists say it appears to be the first documented case of a spider eating a possum. It looks like it's a baby possum, but this is wild. The average tarantula is no longer than a spoon. This one was exceptionally large. Yeah, that thing is huge. That's a big boy. A big hairy boy. Look how big that is. Damn. The spider body was bigger than a baseball. The possum was the size of about a softball. That's ridiculous. The possum was bigger than the spider. Jeez, man. He eating good tonight. Damn, nature, you scary. Tarantulas are nocturnal hunters and normally eat insects. But if they're bigger, they can prey on frogs, mice, and apparently possums. And that is that. I don't know what you meant by that. Maybe it isn't me. But you can hit me up on Twitter and tell me what you're thinking. But everybody, I am sad to say that we are out of time. So I know that you liked what you heard because you stayed with us in the end, and we thank you for that. So go ahead and smash that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. If you like, and since you stayed with us at the end, go ahead and be sure to check us live every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, except on holidays and anything, those kind of things where we'll be off just like everybody else. And if you want to join the News Roundup, be sure to join the Discord, hit me up on Twitter or wherever else you can find me, and ask to be on the show, because we do like to do these as panel shows from time to time. Primarily, they're done as panel shows. Every once in a while, I like to do it by myself, which is why you're seeing me now alone. But we do have it open to pretty much anybody of any political stripe. As long as you're respectful and can respect what we're trying to do here and bring the knowledge, you're good people. As long as you're not lying about stuff, as long as you're not promoting conspiracy theories, and you just want to talk about the facts of the news and not get into a ton of like super off the wall opinions. I don't care if you're a leftist or a right winger. I don't want that shit on the show. I want respectful dialogue while we're having the show, and you're more than welcome to come on. Also should note that Cipher State is another show that we do, and it is a same name on all platforms. Yep, same name on all platforms. It's Crowdsourced Politics, sourced ED, across all platforms except Twitter because of character limit, where it's Crowdsourced Poll. You can get the links above, below, and I'll just drop the Twitter here again because it's easier. So you should get the Twitter links coming up. But yes, hit me up across any of those social medias, and you can find us there. Facebook is actually Crowdsourced Tribune because it's the page for our primary not-for-profit. So that's where you can find us. But Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Discord, Crowdsourced Politics, you should be able to find us. Another thing we should mention is that Cipher State is another program that we do, which is a foreign affairs, foreign policy focused panel show where we talk about an issue facing the world today and how it might impact the world in the future from a geopolitical standpoint. Our last episode was on the German elections, and we're still determining what this episode is going to be the third Sunday of this month, which is the 21st, so right before Thanksgiving, what we're going to be discussing. Those shows are open to people that are more political savvy when it comes to international politics. And so if you know somebody or are yourself a international political aficionado, then you are more than welcome to come on the show. Hit us up on the Discord, tell us about yourself, and then we'll fit you in when we can and have space. This happens again, third Thursday of every month at around 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join the Discord. Discord's happening. Join the Tribune. The Tribune comments and the writers group are all linked to the Facebook group at Facebook.com/groups/Tribune Commons, where you can find a myriad of different people of political stripes talking about different political topics, social topics, and what have you, in a respectful, more long-form dialogue than what you can get on Twitter. And as always, everybody, as we say at Crowdsourced Politics, keep your head up through the political storm.